Frankie Baldwin and Nate DeLuca, from the two feuding families of the biggest wine manufacturers, are successfully operating their vineyard. But will their secret engagement, the pressure of loans for the vineyard, and doubts about their compatibility ultimately keep them apart? We get a good first look at the vineyard where Frankie is working and asking a llama called Mittens to help her out. Mittens does not show any interest in working, and soon, her boyfriend Nate shows up. They argue about Nate being late and he calls her impossible. Frankie quickly tells Nate to get back to work and that Mittens is getting anxious. Nate confronts Mittens and assures him that there might be a lot of work, but the demand for the Sorrento wines they are working on is huge and they can expand soon. Frankie is worried about expansion, but Nate assures her that they have a huge vineyard, and they will be very profitable. Frankie reminds him how they have taken a huge bank loan and invested everything from their first year in the expansion. She also reminds him what is at stake since they have put Sorrento as collateral. He tells her to not worry about any risks, and she comments on how everyone calls them the perfect pairing because they are the opposite. Nate takes that moment to bring out the drone, which Frankie hates, but the drone seems to be carrying a surprise for Frankie, an engagement ring. As Frankie is still shocked, Nate gets hold of the ring and gets down on one knee. He tells her that this land represents them and their future. He describes a future with their kids and another llama. Frankie is overwhelmed and teary, and agrees that the future he describes sounds nice. He then finally asks her to marry him, and without hesitation, she says yes. As they walk back, they go over the plan to inform their families about their engagement at dinner. They discuss their old DeLuca Baldwin family rivalry due to their history of being the major players in the grape growing and winemaking business in the area. Frankie then gets an alert and says she needs to leave. Nate guesses she is going to work on his Valentine's Day present, just as he is going to work on hers. She reminds him that Valentine's Day is in 4 weeks, and that he will find out about it then. Frankie has gone back to college to finish her course in biochemistry to understand Nate's perspective more, and as a Valentine's Day present for him, she meets Shay Michaels, who is working on Valentine's Day cards. Shay hands Frankie a card, who reminds her that when they were assigned together, Shay thought she was having a midlife crisis. Shay reminds her that she is a dog walker with no idea what she wants to do in life. She then notices the ring on Frankie's finger and squeals. She is very excited for Frankie and asks her for details about her engagement. Frankie tells her they may not get married till next year since they will be overworked with the expansion of the vineyard. Frankie tells Shay she is too excited for someone who has not even met Nate. She also discusses how she needs to take this last course to graduate. Shay thinks it is too sweet she is taking the course for her science nerd finance, but Frankie tells her that Nate just takes a scientific approach to things, and she wants to be able to understand that better. She tells her she is also doing it for herself since she had to drop out in the middle to work for her dad, but she is even more excited that she is getting married. Meanwhile, Nate is taking a class on organic gardening to learn more about intuition and Frankie's perspective on things in the vineyard as a Valentine's Day gift for her. He is trying to understand the soil with his youngest brother Gabe, who thinks the whole thing is very weird. Dorothy Hubbard, their instructor, tells them to feel the soil and dig in, while Gabe keeps making fun of the process. Nate tells him to be serious because Dorothy inspires Frankie, and she loves her methods. Gabe tells her that is very romantic, and Nate requests him to be supportive. Gabe then tells Nate he wants to ditch dinner that night, but because it is the night for their big announcement, Nate somehow convinces him to come. Carla DeLuca, Nate's mother, welcomes Charles Baldwin, Frankie's father, for the dinner. Nate's third brother Marco and Frankie's cousin Lexi, who are also dating, immediately tell the group they have a big announcement. Frankie and Nate are surprised when Lexi and Marco reveal their engagement and their plans to get married on Valentine's Day in 4 weeks. Lexi conveys how she is getting the chance to study with a famous pastry chef, and Marco wants to go with her to visit vineyards and learn more about them. They want to make it their honeymoon. Everyone is excited about them, and Nate drags Frankie to the kitchen, pretending to get champagne. Nate and Frankie decide they should hold on to their announcement for a while to not take away from Marco and Lexi's big moment. They discuss how they are not planning to get married for a while so they can wait till after their wedding. At the vineyard, Nate asks Frankie if she is fine with keeping their engagement a secret, and she tells him she is surprised they are not the ones getting married first. They then discuss how good it is that the pressure is not on them, but they can still offer to help Marco and Lexi plan the wedding so they are more prepared for theirs. Marco and Lexi then come in and ask about lunch. Nate explains how they are swamped with work because the vines could bud too early, and they are trying methods to slow them down. Lexi points out that she has been very busy at the bakery, so she has not yet understood what goes into making wine. Marco and Lexi tell them how Charles and Carla are already arguing about where the wedding should take place. Lexi hopes that her mom, Patricia, can act as a referee between the feuding families to decide the perfect place for them. Frankie assures that she will love having Patricia stay with her for the wedding. Frankie also offers to help them out with the wedding. Lexi informs them how she and Marco even took a compatibility test, which showed perfect results. She explains how it is a workshop with fun exercises, and Frankie and Nate look intrigued. They suggest that Frankie and Nate should also take the test before Valentine's Day. In the kitchen, Frankie and Nate discuss how they are sure they are very compatible and make fun of the test. They discuss how they complement each other in a good way. Marco and Lexi then come to the kitchen to ask them for a favor. Marco asks Nate to be his best man as an older brother, and Lexi asks Frankie, her favorite cousin, to be her maid of honor. They all get excited and happily agree. Lexi and Frankie are shopping for wedding dresses when Frankie assures a hesitant Lexi to follow her heart and not worry about everything happening too fast. Frankie then spots a wedding dress she loves and holds it in front of the mirror. Not knowing about Frankie's engagement, Lexi thinks she has picked out a gown for her and thanks Frankie for finding a perfect one. Meanwhile, the men are shopping for tuxedos when Gabe expresses his sadness about not being the best man. They then try to find a combination for all three brothers to be each other's best man. Marco also jokes about Gabe never getting married. Carla and Charles are bickering about where the wedding should be. Marco and Lexi politely inform them that they will consider their points and decide soon. Carla comments on how in sync Marco and Lexi are and calls them the perfect pairing. This alerts Frankie and Nate, who decide to take the compatibility test after all. At the compatibility seminar, Frankie and Nate are excited and feel that they have everything under control. The host informs them about the series of activities and how they will be graded based on how they perform and how some observers view their teamwork. When their time begins, Frankie and Nate immediately start arguing about the activity they want to choose, but when they spot an observer near them, they smile and pretend to be in complete agreement. During the activities, they realize they cannot agree on anything as a team, and their host asks them a couple of questions, which they also manage to get wrong. Even the shelf they prepare completely topples in the class. At the Vineyard the next day, Frankie and Nate discuss the compatibility seminar and are nervous about the results. They then realize they worked on a vine twice, and while Frankie is panicking, Nate assures her that since there are more vines, they will face such problems, but they just have to keep in sync with each other. Then the alert chimes and Frankie's face falls as she gets to know they failed the compatibility test. They both still pretend to be fine and agree that a test cannot decide their future. Just then, Marco and Lexi come up to them to hide from Charles and Carla. They tell them they are settling for a simple wedding to avoid the chaos. Frankie reminds Lexi how she has always wanted a big wedding, and they suggest Sorrento as a neutral territory for them to get married, since it is something Nate and Frankie started on their own. Marco and Lexi are overjoyed and thank them for this favor. Frankie and Nate discuss their vines budding early, and Nate tells her not to worry, since only a frost can be a big problem for them, but the chances of that happening are very slim. Frankie divides the sections they need to monitor, and Nate assures her that everything in the vineyard will work out. Frankie is still worried about their compatibility test, and they both agree to try out some activities for couples. They discuss how nice it would be to get married in their vineyard, but they decide they will plan all that next year for Valentine's Day when they have more time. Gabe spots Shay walking dogs on the sidewalk and makes a funny comment. They both introduce themselves, and she asks if he is related to Nate, since she knows him through Frankie. Gabe asks if she knows Nate, and she hesitates, before saying no and walking off. Frankie is thrilled to welcome her Aunt Patricia, who asks her about the expansion. She looks at Lexi and Frankie and is filled with joy about how well they are doing in their lives. She is also excited about how Charles and Carla must be fighting all the time and is eager to watch it. Nate and Frankie bring everyone on a trip to the vineyard to discuss where the wedding will be and go over exciting ideas. Carla keeps suggesting the hilltop as a spot at DeLuca, and Charles keeps suggesting Baldwin Farms. Patricia then intervenes and tells her brother Charles and her childhood friend Carla to let go of the rivalry and just accept Sorrento as the perfect place for them to get married. Frankie then gets back to work, and Charles talks to the boys about logistics. Frankie discusses the wedding with Shay, who comments on how Frankie and Nate are giving away their wedding for Marco and Lexi. Shay notices how the compatibility test is worrying Frankie, and she tells her that she needs to do something to feel connected with Nate. Frankie decides to plan a surprise romantic dinner for Nate that she can cook. Meanwhile, Nate discusses with Gabe how Frankie does not like surprises at all in their organic gardening class and how she is worried about the compatibility score. Nate then talks about the pressure of the expansion and their loan, and by mistake lets it slip that Lexi and Marco are doing all the fun things they wanted to do for their wedding. Gabe catches on, and while Nate tries to dodge the topic, Gabe realizes they are engaged. Gabe is excited to be his best man, but Nate warns him not to tell anyone till Marco and Lexi get married. Gabe understands that Nate and Frankie are jealous of their wedding and suggests that they should do something special for each other. Patricia and Frankie are tasting the wedding cakes, and Lexi informs them that another pastry chef will be making her cake. She also asks Frankie for her opinion on the cake she would choose if she were getting married. Frankie hesitates but finally picks the red velvet, and Lexi also feels it is the perfect choice. Frankie then gets up to leave for her romantic surprise dinner with Nate at their favorite spot, which she says is by the lake. Patricia and Lexi make fun of Frankie for cooking something. Meanwhile, Nate is with Marco and tells him he needs to go to the vineyard for a romantic meal, which Nate says is their favorite spot. Nate and Frankie end up preparing romantic dinners and waiting at separate spots, without any signal on their phones. There is awkwardness between them the next day when they discuss how it is technology's fault that they could not communicate properly. They also try to justify having different favorite spots and agree that they are normally completely in sync with each other because they work so well together. Nate then points out that Frankie is assembling the wedding invitations wrong, and she sighs and starts again. They mail the invitations and discuss how they need to meet Marco and Lexi at the flower shop. They then run into Shay, who is walking dogs, and she recognizes Nate as Frankie's fiancé. When Nate asks how they know each other, Shay makes an excuse about Frankie wanting dogs and Nate is very surprised. Gabe spots Shay again and he nervously makes a lot of dog puns to impress Shay, who gets very confused about what he is saying. He then tries to casually walk off but crashes into a dumpster. Nate and Frankie then bump into Dorothy, who greets Nate. Frankie recognizes Dorothy from all the books she has read about organic farming and is thrilled to meet her. Nate makes an excuse about using Dorothy's produce for the food pairing and Dorothy seems very confused. He then tells Dorothy they are getting late and they leave. Nate and Frankie reach the flower shop and Marco pretends to know about the flowers. Lexi tells him how they got the compatibility activities so they can learn to communicate better. Frankie also immediately mentions that she and Nate got those activities too and reveals that they took the test and passed it. Nate and Frankie are in the vineyard when they discuss the forecast about it being a little cool and Frankie starts to worry. Nate tells her not to worry as they are doing their best and focusing on the positives instead. They then decide to do one of the activities suggested for them and Frankie asks him to randomly pick one. Frankie is shocked by what he picked and tells him to select another, but he just laughs. They end up going for a ziplining and Frankie is scared to death. She tries to argue why they should not do this. Nate assures her how safe it is and tells her there is nothing to worry about. Frankie is still not convinced but she goes for it, all the while screaming and Nate also does the same, but he enjoys the journey. Frankie and Nate are at the vineyard and Frankie worries about how they can know for sure if the vines will bud. Nate tells her to trust her instincts and insists that the vines will be fine because they both are taking very good care of them. Lexi appreciates all the work that Frankie is doing. She tells her about another argument between Carla and Charles about the first dance. They remember their childhood days and the family feud. Lexi then tells her how she holds Nate and her as the gold standard of relationships. She tells her she hopes she and Marcus can also be like that. Frankie assures her that everyone gets nervous before their wedding and that Lexi should not freak out. Marco is out shopping with Nate and asks him about his Valentine's Day organic workshop. Nate tells Marco how he is now starting to learn Frankie's perspective. Marco suggests that the four of them should go for miniature golf for fun and Nate promises to ask Frankie. Carla and Charles are again arguing about the wedding and Patricia warns them they will not get dessert if they keep bickering. Carla and Charles agree that they think Nate and Frankie are moving too fast with the expansion. Patricia explains that they were very successful in their first year and got a lot of attention, and if they want to grow Sorrento, it is the perfect time. Nate tells Frankie about mini golf and she agrees to go, but she insists that they should treat this as something casual and fun, because making everything a competition is driving them apart. They agree to make it fun and Frankie opens with the first shot during mini golf and misses. Nate tries to reassure her but Marco and Lexi keep performing well. Frankie is frustrated but she is not able to get it right. The place is about to close but Frankie keeps trying till they turn off the lights. Nate and Frankie are discussing food for the wedding when Frankie gets an alert for her test. She tells Nate she needs to go for a bridesmaid's fitting. Nate also tells her he has some errands to take care of. Shay and Frankie are practicing for the test, but Frankie seems distracted by why she and Nate are not in sync. She insists she needs to talk to him but Shay convinces her to focus on the test for the time being. Nate and Gabe are back at the organic gardening class and pushing their feet into the mud. When Nate tells Gabe how he needs to talk to Frankie about being on the same page, Gabe points out that Frankie worries about everything and he should not focus too much on it. During their bridal shower, Patricia plans some games for the two couples and asks them questions about how much they know their partners. While Lexi and Marco get all the questions right, Nate and Frankie get frustrated because they are not able to get the basic answers right about each other and their relationship. When they are arguing about their favorite song, Nate mentions in front of everyone by mistake that he played the song when he flew in the engagement ring. Everyone is surprised and there is an awkward silence. As Lexi walks towards them, Frankie starts apologizing for not telling her. But Lexi is thrilled and hugs Frankie and expresses how excited she is. There is a lot of laughter but Frankie tells everyone that it is Lexi and Marco's day, and they don't want to make it about themselves. Lexi insists that she doesn't mind sharing the spotlight. Marco then tells them to consider having a double wedding and Lexi is very excited by the idea. Both Frankie and Nate look very confused and uncertain, but everyone convinces them to go for it. Nate and Frankie discuss their wedding in the vineyard and Frankie is freaking out about it being in 2 weeks. Nate tells her that they can still say no to their families but also assures her that most of the things for the wedding are already planned. They then start making calls for wedding bands and invitation cards, and people start laughing at them for wanting their orders so soon. Patricia goes with Frankie for wedding dress shopping, who is still freaking out about the arrangements. Patricia is overjoyed after seeing Frankie in the dress. Frankie thanks Patricia for always taking care of her. She also asks if she can do motherly duties for her along with Lexi, and Patricia says she will be thrilled. Gabe runs into Shay again and apologizes for all the puns he made last time. Shay tells him the place has amazing donuts and tells him to get 2 for them. Frankie and Nate discuss the wedding again while tending to the vines, and Nate tells her how he took care of a few things. He then shows her the huge to-do list, and Frankie freaks out when she realizes that the wedding is just in 3 days. Nate still assures her that they can make it happen. He tells her to just focus on their relationship and not panic. Dorothy's classes have ended and she congratulates them for completing them. She asks Gabe what he learned from the experience, and he tells her that there are no shortcuts and things need to be done the right way. This puts Nate in thought, and as Dorothy asks him what he learned, he tells her that people need to follow their instincts. Dorothy is impressed by their answers and tells the group to grab their certificates. Nate looks worried and tells Gabe his instinct is telling him that the weather forecast might be wrong, and they may see a frost. Gabe tells him he must be worried about the wedding and advises him not to overthink it. Meanwhile, Shay and Frankie are waiting for their exam results, and Frankie asks Shay to distract her. She also tells her that she is sure she and Nate can handle anything. They then get their results and they both learn they have passed the exam. Charles makes a toast for the 2 couples and tells Nate and Marco that he thinks they will make his girls very happy. Gabe also gives a short toast about how if his brothers can find perfect women, so can he. They all toast to the happy couples when they suddenly get a weather alert for the frost warning. Frankie looks disturbed and points out that they do not have enough heaters to cover the crop and they could lose everything. Frankie and Nate discuss solutions for ways in which they can protect the vines from frost. They discuss how they can probably freeze the vine themselves with sprinklers to manage the temperature, but Frankie feels it is too risky and starts to panic again. Nate assures her that they can figure it out. Shay comes to help Frankie after she learns about the situation from Gabe, and Frankie is very surprised that she knows Gabe. They discuss how Gabe is a good guy, and Shay also hands Frankie her unofficial diploma. Frankie discusses the progress on the heater situation with Nate when he notices her diploma. She tells him that he inspired her to understand his logical perspective better. He laughs and shows her his certificate for organic farming. They both are amazed by what the other has done for them. Nate then gets an idea from all his classes about how they can add something to the water they will spray to control the temperature. Frankie also uses her learnings from science classes, and they both settle for using vegetable oils. They spray the vines at night and hope for the best. The next morning, Frankie asks if it worked, and Nate informs her that they still need time to see the results. They both also agree to postpone the wedding, realizing that they can do anything together if they want to and not rush things. Nate is getting ready and Carla comes in to talk to him. She tells him about her wedding with his father and how they almost did not get married because of some problem with the vineyard. She tells him to still go ahead with the wedding, but Nate insists that he and Frankie are being practical. She tells him there is nothing practical about love and that he should think about it. Charles then goes to meet Frankie and asks about the vines. Frankie is unsure if their plan will work, and Charles tells her to go with her gut. He also tells her she can still get married, but she insists that she and Nate have decided this. Charles reminds her of the time he learned she was dating Nate, and Patricia told him to suck it up because they are made for each other. Charles tells her that he believes it too because he can see it in Frankie's eyes. Her instincts tell her that Nate is the best for her. Lexi is refusing to come out of the washroom, and Nate informs Frankie that Marco and Lexi are planning to cancel their wedding because Nate and Frankie did. Frankie reminds them about their honeymoon next week and how their compatibility test also showed they are perfect for each other. They insist that Marco and Lexi should get married. Marco then informs them that they failed the test, and Nate and Frankie are very surprised. They all laugh about flunking the test. Nate and Frankie discuss if they are doing the right thing, and Nate suddenly notices that the vines have started budding. Frankie gets very excited that they solved this problem. They are about to go back to the ceremony when Nate stops Frankie and tells her how he knew from their first Valentine's Day that he will marry her. He tells her they managed to handle everything in the end, and they both decide to not waste time and get married. Charles walks Lexi and Frankie down the aisle happily and hands them over to Marco and Nate. Both the couples exchange vows together and they kiss their brides. After the ceremony, Nate tells her how glad he is that he reached the end of the road with her. They decide they are the perfect pairing and finally wish each other a happy Valentine's Day as husband and wife.